week we have had. Last week, when I gave the announcement at the end of the service that I've been appointed as the new pastor at Camp Hill United Methodist Church, it felt like, as some of you said to me, all the air was sucked out of the room. This announcement obviously came as a complete shock and surprise to all of us. And I think sometimes in our shock and surprise, we want someone to blame, right? Some place to take our emotions, our fear, or our struggling. But in this unique situation, there is really no one to blame. Pastor Sarah announced her retirement on May 11th, and then it was announced here about the transition on May 25th. And even tonight, your governing board is working with our superintendent to make a plan and a faithful way forward for a new pastor who will come to serve at Hope Church. There's no one really to blame in this unique situation except maybe the timing, because it feels so fast and such a shock to all of us. And so I just wanted to acknowledge up front this morning, no matter the emotions that you are experiencing right now, that you have experienced this week, that you are not alone. That perhaps some of us come with grief and sadness and frustration and anger or uncertainty or anxiety, or maybe even some of us come with hope for a new season of possibilities of what a new pastor and gifts a new pastor can bring to this incredible congregation. And so no matter where you are on the roller coaster of emotions that you may have experienced this week, know that I am there with you and that Christ meets you in the middle of that as we walk through this transition together. And so in light of the shock and the grief of last Sunday, we had to pivot this morning because I was planning to start today a sermon series on the 10 Commandments for the summer. And after what happened last Sunday, that no longer really felt like the most appropriate conversation to have this morning. So instead, we scrapped that plan. And today we're going to talk about a different passage from the Bible. When I was thinking and praying about all of you this week, I was thinking about the passage from John 11 about Jesus and his friend Lazarus. And interestingly enough, Lori and I had the opportunity to attend annual conference this week in Williamsport with a gathering of United Methodists from central Pennsylvania region. And wouldn't you know, Lori, the pastor the bishop preached on, and we talked about this weekend, was John 11. So it's crazy how God works in mysterious ways. And so I want to spend some time looking at this story together and processing it together this morning. So if you're unfamiliar with John 11 and the story of Lazarus, it begins that Lazarus, this friend of Jesus, was sick. And Lazarus had two pretty famous biblical sisters. You may have heard about them before, Mary and Martha. Mary was actually the one who anointed Jesus' feet with oil and dried it with her hair. And Martha was the one who had trouble sitting still. She was always doing something. Some of you all can relate to Martha in this church. You know who you are. Of always trying to do something for Jesus. So we had Mary and Martha, these two famous sisters of Jesus, and they are concerned about their brother because he's very, very sick. And so they send a message to Jesus. And to me, the message that these two sisters send to Jesus is powerful, not so much because of what it says, but because of what it does not say. They send a message to Jesus, and it simply says, Lord, he who you love is ill. Notice that Mary and Martha aren't saying, Jesus, please come help us now. We need your help now. Please heal my brother now. He needs you to come and heal him. They don't say any of that. They simply just inform Jesus that their brother is sick. And to me, this is so powerful because it communicates to me the deep love and trust and intimacy in Mary and Martha's relationship with Jesus, that they have this deep trust that they don't even need to ask Jesus to come because they know that Jesus is going to come and meet them in their hour of need, that they know that that's what love does, that Jesus will not abandon them in this hour of their need. It's like there once was a missionary that told a story about two good friends that fought together in World War I. And one of the dear friends was wounded in battle and actually stuck in the middle of no man's land there, wounded without anyone to help him. But when the friend got word that his dear friend was out there stuck in the middle of no man's land, the friend decided to crawl on his stomach out to risk his life to help his friend. And when the wounded soldier saw the face of his friend coming to meet him, he simply looked up and said, I knew you would come. That's the deep trust and relationship between Jesus and Mary and Martha, that they simply knew Jesus would come. They trusted Jesus to meet them in their hour of need. It's powerful to me that they had this kind of deep love and trust. And Jesus does come, but he doesn't come in the timing that Mary and Martha wanted or anticipated. In fact, this scripture tells us that Jesus stayed 2 more days where he was before he went to Lazarus' home. And we could say, well, why, Jesus? Why would you wait 2 whole days after receiving this message from Mary and Martha, and they know you're going to come? Why did you wait, Jesus? And, the truth answer is we don't really know, but we could wonder, okay, maybe Jesus waited because he knew he was going to perform a miracle in Lazarus' life, and so he wanted to make sure Lazarus was dead. Like, it wasn't like Lazarus was sleeping or in a coma. He was dead, right? He'd been dead for 4 days as the story continues. Maybe that's why Jesus waited, so that the miracle would be that even more profound. But I also wonder if maybe Jesus waited because he was counting the cost and understanding God's timing that is so different from our own understanding of time. You see, time and time again, when Jesus talks about glory in John's gospel, it's often connected to the cross. And Jesus is talking that this healing of Lazarus would glorify God, that somehow the healing of Lazarus is deeply connected in Jesus' mind to the cross. And here's why I think that's so. Jesus knew that going to Bethany was only 2 miles from Jerusalem. And if Jesus would go to Bethany to heal his friend Lazarus, he was going to get the attention of the religious people in Jerusalem who were already mad at Jesus. So Jesus knew that going to Bethany to heal his friend was a significant step closer to the cross. That going to help his friend would lead Jesus closer to his own death. That in John's gospel, Jesus is crucified on Passover as the sacrificial lamb. And perhaps Jesus was also aware of God's larger narrative and holding God's time in his mind as he calculated his steps toward the cross. Jesus knew all of this and knew what this decision would cost him, and yet he still decided in God's timing to go to Bethany and help his friend, even though he knew it would take him closer to the cross. And so Jesus goes to Bethany in God's timing, not in Mary and Martha's timing, and here's what happens in John 11, beginning in verse 17. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now, Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha had heard that Jesus was coming, she went up and met him while Mary stayed home. Martha said to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Jesus comes, but in Mary and Martha's mind, he's too late. That Martha, who has trouble sitting still, runs out to meet Jesus and says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." It's almost like she confronts Jesus, being, "Jesus, where were you? We trusted and knew you were going to come, but why did you come so late? Why did you delay? Did you not get my message? Why didn't you reply or respond sooner? Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Lord, if you had been there. Friends, I don't know about you, but I think we've all been there with Martha at different seasons in our lives, crying out to God saying, "Lord, if you had been there, my loved one would not have died. Lord, if you had been there, I'd still have a job. Lord, if you had been there, I'd still be married. I wouldn't be brokenhearted. Lord, if you'd been there, my child wouldn't be addicted. Lord, if you had been there, I wouldn't be so alone and isolated. Lord, if you had been there, where are you, God?" And so Martha is in the deep of her own sorrow and suffering and grief and anger and despair, but yet in the middle of that, the next words that she says to Jesus show us Martha's profound faith. That the next statement out of her mouth is, "But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him." That even in her own despair, where she had cried more tears than she thought was possible. Even in her suffering and her grief and transitioning to life without her brother, Martha still had faith in Jesus. That Jesus met her there right in that darkest moment of her life, and that Martha still trusted Jesus in that moment. And I wonder if it's because of Martha's incredible faith in Jesus that Jesus goes on to give her the promise of the resurrection. In verse 23, Jesus said to Martha, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." And Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world." Jesus tells Martha, "I am the resurrection and the life." That is who Jesus is. This is a powerful moment in this story because I believe in this moment, Jesus is shifting the conversation. He's shifting the conversation away from what Martha lost to what Jesus brings. He's shifting the conversation away from Martha's own grief and loss about the loss of her brother into the hope and promise of resurrection and new life that Jesus brings. That Jesus is calling Martha not to trust in her own understanding of timing, that her brother has been dead for 4 days. Where were you, Jesus? Shifting her focus from her own understanding to timing into trusting God, who is the author of time. That this is a significant moment in the story where Jesus is asking Martha to trust him even more in this moment of grief and sorrow and suffering, that Jesus meets her there. And friends, this is incredibly good news for us at Hope Church because I believe Jesus meets us this morning and begins to work in our hearts to shift us from what we've lost to what Jesus brings us. That if we're honest this morning, we have grief about what we have lost. That we feel like we're losing a special relationship with each other. That our time together felt cut short and gone too soon. And while all of that is real and you can't heal what you don't reveal, so you got to be honest and name and hold all of that. But I believe right now in this moment together, Jesus meets us here in our sorrow, in our pain, and begins to slowly shift our perspective, shift the conversation into the hope and the promise and new life that Jesus brings. That we trust not in our own understanding of time, but we trust in God as the author of time. Because church, if resurrection is possible for Lazarus, it is possible for Hope Church as well. That if Jesus met Mary and Martha in their moment of need and did not abandon them, Jesus will not abandon Hope Church either. That Jesus will meet us in this moment of need and increase our faith as we journey into a new season, a new chapter of ministry and work in the world. And so Martha meets Jesus here in this moment as he begins to shift the perspective and the conversation. And Martha runs back to tell Mary. And so Mary, it's her turn to come out and meet Jesus. And this is what happens in verse 32. When Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her were also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. And so he said, "Where have you laid him?" And they said, "Lord, come and see." And Jesus began to weep. Before Jesus fixes anything in this situation, he cries. That Jesus in this moment shows us a God of emotion, a God who cares deeply about us, a God whose heart was overwhelmed with anguish, that Christ weeps with us, that Jesus is no stranger to our suffering and our grief or our anger or our fear, that Jesus is with us. That in this moment reminds me of the psalmist. It says, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit." That it is powerful to remember that in our grief and suffering, Jesus meets us and holds us. That Hope Church has never been my church. It's not even your church. It's not the conference's church. Hope Church is God's church. That God holds us all in the very palm of his hand. That God even weeps with us in our sorrow and our griefs and all the moments of frustration or disappointment in our lives. That God is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. And so after this moment when Jesus weeps with Mary, he then continues on in verse 38. And being again greatly disturbed, Jesus came to the tomb of Lazarus. And it was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. And Jesus said, "Take away the stone." And Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there's a stench because he has been dead for 4 days." I wonder if Martha thought Jesus just wanted to see the face of his loved one, his dear friend Lazarus, one more time, similar like we might want to see the face of our loved one after they have passed away just one more time. And I wonder if that's what Martha thought. In fact, there was this idea at this time that a person's soul remained floating around the body for 3 to 4 days until it departed from the body. And so Martha is making the point to Jesus, Jesus, Lazarus is dead. His soul is gone. He has been dead for 4 days. His face is already starting to deteriorate. We're not rolling back the stone just for you to see him one more time, Jesus. But Jesus said to Martha in verse 40, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you, for you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I've said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you have sent me." Church, I want to pause here for a moment, that before Jesus does anything, he prays to his Father in heaven, that we must never underestimate the power of prayer, that we need to be continuing to pray for each other in this season of transition, to never underestimate the power of prayer. And so after Jesus prays, in verse 43, when he had said this, he cried in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out, his hands and feet unbound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Friends, never underestimate the almighty power of God. That God's power brought a dead man back to life. That God's power turns selfish people into servants. That God's power turns doubters into people of faith. That God's power turns cowards into heroes. That God's power is making all things new. That the resurrection power of God is still active and present in our life, in our church, and the world today. Do you see it? That I believe God still has good plans in store for Hope Church. That God is with us and loves us and is walking this journey with us. And no matter how uncertain it may feel right now, Christ is with us. That there will be joy and laughter again. That you will learn to love a new pastor, just as I am so grateful for the love that we have shared. That new leaders will be raised up into leadership and ministry. That new people will come to know and follow Jesus Christ because of you and your faithful witness in your ministry. Remember, I am not the church. You are the church. This is ultimately God's church together, that you continue to do the life-giving ministry that God has called you to do in this season, in this community, that it will set people free. I want to close by sharing one final story with you this morning. Just a few days before I received the phone call about going to Camp Hill, I happened to be on a hike down a mountain. And as I was walking down this mountain, I was taking some time just to process my life. I was just thinking back over my life and reflecting on some of my own fear or failure or sorrow or unforgiveness or bitterness, because stuff happens in our life and sometimes we just don't take the time to actually process that. And so I was processing through different experiences or things and different seasons in my life with God. And as I was walking down this path on this mountain, I felt led to stop and to literally draw a line in front of me on the path that I was walking. And I felt in that moment that God was calling me to offer deep and true unconditional forgiveness to a person in my life that I thought I had forgiven, but if I'm honest, there was still some resentment and bitterness left in me. And so I drew this line in the path in front of me, and it's kind of silly to admit, but I literally kept walking up to the line and then walking back. Walking up to the line and walking back because I didn't actually want to step across. I didn't actually want to forgive. And so I kept fighting with that line there on the path back and forth until I finally got to a place of surrender that I was willing to step across that line into full forgiveness. And it felt like a burden had been lifted. And so I kept journeying down the path until I got to another spot on the path. And this time I was really wrestling with something that had caused me deep grief in my life. And so once again, I drew another path, another line in front of me on the path that I was walking. And I looked over to my left and I saw this pile of stones from maybe like an old spring house that had fallen down on the mountain. And I looked over there and I was like, wow, God, sometimes my life feels like that. Sometimes my life feels like a mess of like, where are you, God? Lord, if you had been there, this would not have happened. This is not always the story that I would have written. And I remember standing there processing my own grief and my own story and standing and wrestling with that line that I had drawn in front of me. And I finally got to a place that I felt like God was inviting me over the line and to receive healing and peace. And so I stepped over that and felt God's presence with me in a tangible way, that I was no longer walking alone, but that Christ was walking with me. And I kept journeying down the path until I got to the bottom of the mountain, and there was this little stream. And I saw a rock over to the right-hand side, and to me, that medium-sized rock symbolized all of my grief, all of my unforgiveness, all of my fear, or my failure, or my shame, you name it. And I picked up that rock and hoisted it high over my head, and I just chucked it into the water. And in that motion of just releasing all of that fear and that pain and that sorrow and anguish, I felt such freedom and love and joy and peace in a way I had not felt in a very long time. And I share that story with you today because there are seasons in our lives where stuff happens that we simply say that's not the way it's supposed to be. And we have deep anguish or fear or anxiety about that. But Christ meets us in the middle of those seasons of our life if we're willing to let him. Friends, I am aware that there are tombs in our life, that there is unforgiveness and bitterness and anger and sorrow that sometimes keeps us back from following Jesus. But Jesus comes to invite us, to call us out of the tombs of our life. When we were at conference, the bishop talked about that there are tombs of our time, that there is addiction, and there is poverty, and there is sexism, and there is racism, and there's an epidemic of loneliness, that there are tombs of our time that Jesus is calling us out of, that we are to be people of resurrection and new life, that Jesus, just like Lazarus, is calling us out of the tomb, that Jesus doesn't want us to stay stuck in our fear and our sorrow, but invites us into new life. And so, church, I don't know what that is for you. Maybe you need to go take a rock and throw it into the water. Maybe you need to talk and vent and process with a trusted spiritual friend. Maybe you need to write down all the emotions and things that you're experiencing in your life and write that all down and crumple it up and burn it in a campfire. I don't know what that is for you, but some cathartic act may bring healing in your life, as I believe Jesus wants to set you free from all the things that so often bind us. Church, the good news is that you and I do not worship a God of the grave. We worship the God of the empty tomb, who is still calling people from death to life to set us free. The good news is that our grief that we feel and that is real is not the end of our story. That our grief shows us how deeply we have loved one another. That last night as I was praying and thinking about all of you, I too was weeping when I think about all the beautiful memories and time that we have shared together, of how deeply you have loved me, and that I've been able to love you, and we journeyed together these last 3 years. Our grief and our sorrow is real. It reminds me of the phrase that it's better to have loved and to have lost than to never have loved at all. That we have been given this gift these last 3 years together, and I believe that Hope Church is in a beautiful and healthy place, that I am so prayerful that the next pastor that will come can build on the foundation that we have built together to continue for this church to thrive into the future. Because the good news is that Jesus meets us here and walks with us, that Jesus already knows the plan, already has good plans in store for us. That when we cling to Jesus, we can still have hope. That when we cling to Jesus, we can still be a family of God committed to sharing Christ's hope, growing God's family through fun, authentic, loving relationships. None of that needs to change because Christ is with you. So no matter the storms that you face, either in the church or in your personal lives, know that Jesus is with you, that Jesus weeps with you, that Jesus is no stranger to your suffering and sorrow, but that Jesus wants to set you free. And when we cling to Jesus, we can always